Let's pick things up there for tonight's Dateline Defense. Joining me, Colonel Cedric Leighton, retired Air Force intelligence officer and president of Cedric Leighton Associates. All right, Cedric, reports show an increased Russian presence in Syria as Putin fears that the country's president could be overthrown. The move is alarming U.S. officials, including Secretary of State John Kerry. What are the Russians up to?
Well, the Russians are basically going after what leverage they can gain, Morris. And so what they're looking at doing is exercising as much influence as possible with as much force as they possibly need. So that means that they're going to deploy forces. They've already sent about 1,000 people there. They've put a whole series of logistical efforts in place to include housing for those people. And it looks like they're putting in an air operations center, or the Russian equivalent of one of those. And what that will do is it will give them a bit of leverage over the air war at the very least, and possibly other forms of combat that may protect the Assad regime. Basically what Putin wants to do is he wants to protect the Assad regime as much as he possibly can. That gives him a lot more influence than if the Assad regime were to disappear from Syria at this point in time.
You're right, and Russia has been Syria's biggest ally, but they haven't yet committed to fighting ISIS in the region. What are they waiting for?
They're waiting for the Assad regime to become even stronger. They feel that with a stronger Assad regime, they will be more able, better able to combat any increase in U.S. influence in the region and also an increase in Turkish influence in the region. Their main goal is to preserve Assad because that gives them more power, and it also allows them to help their ally Iran in that northern part of the Middle East.
You know, you mentioned all these countries. The whole situation is making for some very strange bedfellows. How can the U.S. continue to fight ISIS, possibly alongside the Russians, while ignoring the fact that they're helping Assad?
You can't do it over the long term. At some point in time, the fact that Iran and Russia are helping Assad is going to come to the forefront, and the allies that may exist in the form of Iran and possibly Russia fighting ISIS, that's going to go away the minute that ISIS ceases to be a threat. Once ISIS ceases to be a threat, then all of these forces are going to turn on each other, because the next goal of countries like Turkey, many of the Gulf states, is to get rid of Assad. And of course, that's also been a stated goal of U.S. policy. But that is the next chapter. And until that time, we're going to see some very strange coalitions take place in the Middle East, and those coalitions, unfortunately, are not going to be lasting ones.
Yeah. All right. Cedric, let's switch gears to China. The country's president will visit the U.S. this month for high-level talks with President Obama. But at the same time, U.S. officials are weighing the possibility of sanctions against the Chinese government over hack attacks. How big of a cyber threat is China to the U.S., and are economic sanctions the right way to go? China
is the biggest espionage threat against the United States right now in the cyber wars that are going on behind our backs. What that means is that China has a very robust, very thorough intelligence service that is basically designed to do data mining against U.S. targets. The OPM hack is a prime example of that. What they're doing is they're correlating the data that they've been able to get from OPM with other sources such as health insurers, other forms of data hacks that they've been able to perpetrate, and they're going to use that information to find out who is the most vulnerable, who can be turned, and what kind of people hold what kind of positions of influence, not only in Washington, but in other parts of the country.
How likely do you think it will be for these sanctions to go through? I can't imagine we would embarrass China the same month as their state visit. And what does this mean for other international hackers like Russia?
Well, I think that embarrassing China is usually not a good policy move, even without a state visit. But because President Jiang Zemin is going to be here in Washington, they're going to do some very careful behind-the-scenes work to try to limit Chinese embarrassment. However, what they also will need to do is they will need to try to put something in place that is going to have a meaningful effect, perhaps some kind of a cybersecurity treaty between the two countries. But that is a long way off, and the groundwork that needs to be laid for that has not been properly laid at this juncture. And I think at this particular point, we're going to see more back and forth in the realm of the cyber world before we see any progress on mitigating the cyber risks that actually both countries face.
It's the new normal, isn't it? Cyber scares, the war on the internet, it's here to stay.
It sure is, and it's going to only get worse as we move into the Internet of Things, as more devices become connected to the rest of the world. It is going to be exceptionally important to secure those devices, and by the time we're done, about 50 billion devices are going to be tied to the Internet by the year 2020, and that's everything from your refrigerator to your car to the computers that we use today, and that is a huge, huge order to try to secure, and we're not doing a very good job of it right now.
It's always good getting your insight. Retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, president of Cedric Leighton Associates. Thanks.
You bet, Morris. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.